Hello. We are now technically live. So before we get started, and before I thank both Ian C, Esslemont and Stephen Erikson for joining me, I have to point out that we had some technical difficulties earlier, and Cam is starting on his phone because we couldn't get his laptop to work.
Well, they don't really have internet up in Alaska, so this is all sort of steam machines and pipes and things.
We have electricity, and we're working on the rest. So
that's good. That's good.
So, Cam, thank you very much for joining me on this and going to great lengths to connect your phone up when we couldn't get your laptop to work.
I connected my phone to the tubes.
Small carrier pigeons flying away. And also, Stephen Erikson, thank you very much for joining me.
Well, it's a pleasure as usual. Well, it's usually no, it's not usually. Yeah, okay. I'm glad I'm here.
So dearly beloved, we are gathered here because for a number of times now, I've been promising people to do a live stream and answer questions and interact with people, but always put it off because I'm terrified of the technology, and apparently justifiably, given everything that's gone wrong.
Yep.
It's first time for everything.
But so 5,000 subscribers. I just wanted to thank everyone who's subscribed to the channel. I really appreciate it. And I thought the three of us could sit, we could hang out for a bit and have a chat. And I know that you're both just back basically from France, where you were doing a book tour. So I thought we could start. You could tell us a bit about your book tour and how it went.
All right, go ahead, Cam.
Oh, well, okay. Well, first, AP, congratulations on your 5,000 subscribers and growing. So good for you. It's very welcome news. And thank you for having us. So, yes, just back from France, and we had just a fantastic trip. Our publisher, translator, Leha Editions, they hosted us and toured us all around the country. I think I've seen more of the country than my wife, Jerry, who's half French. So it was just a fantastic opportunity, and I hope that we sold a lot of books.
Well, I'm sure you did. And Steve, how did you find France?
It was
map, presumably.
What?
On a map, presumably.
Occasionally, yeah, that was necessary. It was actually just a fantastic tour, and it's the first time Cam and I toured together, but also the first time we got to hang out together in decades. And I kind of felt sorry for our minders because, yeah, we regress very quickly to sort of the stages that we were at as roommates gaming. And I think we ended up giving some of them a pretty hard time, not deliberately, but yeah, we were a bit I don't know what
adolescent. Juvenile?
Yeah, that would be the word. Yeah, adolescent.
That's a nice word.
Yeah.
As you know, AP, dealing with us.
Yeah.
No, you see, this is something that that the regular public don't know. Is like they go, oh yes, those authors, and they produce these works, and when they do interviews, they're all so serious. And you go, you should see them when you guys aren't around. They're a nightmare.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Our demands were endless for our handlers. But no, yes, we just went right back into adolescence as a nice way of saying it. I think our minders were a little bit surprised at having to wheel us around and herd us like cats everywhere.
But when you were there, were there any sort of interesting exhibits or things that you went to? Perhaps, say, an underwater exhibit thing.
Yes. That was in Marseille, and our minder for that event was actually, I think is a native of Marseille, so she was quite sort of proud of this museum display. And to be fair, the reconstruction of the underwater cave was spectacular. It's really, really well done. It was just the conceit of actually visiting the caves that absolutely wiped us out. It's hard to describe.
And the English translation of the narrative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because you didn't actually visit the underwater cave.
Yeah,
well, of course not. Of course not. It's like it's
it became a sort of a Disney-fied ride, and you got into little cars on a tram sort of line, and you sort of went along, visited each station of the cave and where they found certain drawings and certain items, and the narrative at the beginning. You got into this elevator that pretended to take you down 300 feet or so, under the water, and it came on, and it said something like, prepare to descend. And at that moment, we just almost died. We just burst out laughing.
Well, somebody, there was like 10 of us in that little fake elevator. I think somebody said something along the lines of "open the underwater hatch," and
Steve,
me? I don't know. Which is out of Thunderball, and then somebody else said something, but first get bogged, and that's when I think we kind of lost it. Yeah.
And our minder, our minder, who is very patient, was saying, don't talk. All right, we're supposed to be quiet, and we're stifling our laughter. But she's talking the whole time behind us, the whole trip.
Yeah. and of course, when we went down the 120 feet or whatever it was, the doors opened and there were these little train cars, little toy train cars that you sat in, with all these constraints, like these bars that you have to set down like in a roller coaster. But then the thing only goes like 2 miles an hour. So it's like, and you slowly go through the cave basically, and all the various chambers of the cave. And yeah, that reconstruction and rendition of the underwater cave was fantastic. But yeah, the setup for it was, well, we couldn't really take it seriously. So yeah.
It had a certain narrative conceit to it.
Yeah.
But that was one of the museum highlights.
Yeah.
But I also heard from a little bird, perchance, that Cam, it turns out that maybe in one of the new books that you're writing, that there's going to be a whole sort of cookbook sequence because of the Malazan barbecue, that apparently you have now become a specialist in barbecuing.
I was getting a lot of ribbing about my grilling. And actually, I have very little opportunity for it right now, because we have forest fires all around us, and it's very smoky outside. So we're keeping our windows shut, and we're not heading out much at all right now in the interior of Alaska.
What, you have to head out to the interior to barbecue? I'm confused. I mean,
Well,
being in the interior. Sorry.
Oh, right. I see. So I was assuming all that smoke was your barbecuing, but I guess I'm wrong.
It was my barbecuing, yes. What's the? Oh, damn it!
and then following that sequence of like the Malazan Marines sitting around barbecuing, one of them apparently was going to start doing some woodworking. Take out his little carpentry belt and start doing it. But apparently, you've been researching that quite heavily as well.
My hobbies are are being dragged out here. my pathetic attempts, like behind me, the shelving and such other things. You know, you have to have a day job, I find, because this writing thing just isn't working out.
Well, have there been any updates from? I know that as authors, you're generally the last people to hear about updates from the publishers. But have there been any updates about when Forge of the High Mage is likely to be gracing us with its presence?
That's you, Ken.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking. I sent in the manuscript, but I think that because it was delayed and late, it sort of went to the back of the queue, and so that's pushed it back more at Bantam. So I'm thinking winter, because we have to finish going through the galleys and all the rest yet. So that's what I'm thinking. And sadly so, because we could have had the summer to work on it, but I'm pretty sure that all the people who would be doing that work are already committed to other manuscripts that, you know, their plates are quite full.
Well, you know, it gives you time to work on the next one.
Yeah, that's welcome.
And Steve, how's your writing going?
Not too bad. Not too bad. Yeah, I mean, seems to be sort of getting back on track. And of course, the tour helped because Cam and I could talk over specific details and try to remember characters and where we'd left them and all that kind of stuff. So came back pretty fired up for that once I got over the jet lag and all the rest. So yeah, it's been going well.
Oh, that's good. What was that nation in the Malazan world that you had said Cam had designed from? I think it was a previous game that was about mages or something. What was the name of that? What was that country?
Oh man, I haven't have a map of that area. Cam doesn't even remember, which is even worse.
I don't know which one he's referencing. I don't know which of the scenarios he's referencing here.
It's not in that map.
Never a useful map when you need one.
No.
Chalmorzin.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth.
Oh,
we'll just ask chat, shall we?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm not. Oh, there's the comments. Okay.
Yeah, I don't see the comments myself.
That's because you're on a phone.
You're on a phone, Ken. You need a second.
You guys can write all kinds of nasty things, and I won't see it.
Nothing new there. Okay. Sean Morrison, yeah.
There, can you see it now?
There we are. Yes, now I see. So I don't know what Steve's got in mind here.
What are you talking about? It was the three characters from some previous game that had built their own castle. You still don't remember?
Oh, do you mean our almost our first campaign? They were very high powered, stuff.
Yeah, they were high powered, but it wasn't in our. I mean, they showed up in the rake stuff, the Animander stuff, but it was from your previous gaming buddies. You and two others. Yeah, you remember now?
Yeah. And you had a part in that at the end. I sort of introduced you into it and played a bit of a part of it, but it was never officially part of the Malazan world.
No.
Although they did sort of butt in briefly, sort of a flyby, and causing all kinds of chaos on their way. Yeah. Why, were you going to do something with them?
No.
It was a part of the world that we know absolutely nothing about, and we're doing a live stream. So I thought I would ask.
Well,
this is from way back, from before we formalized everything.
Yeah.
Well, actually, that brings up an interesting question. I mean, obviously, you started designing and adding to the world and doing all this, what, over 40 years ago? 30 years ago? Something like that?
A while ago.
Is there anything now that you sort of look back on and go, oh, I wish we'd changed that or added that thing in at the time? Because that'd be really handy now.
That would, yeah. Well, there's always those things you like, looking back, you think, oh, I wish I'd done this or that, but then it would just be a different project. So you're with the project that you established, and you can always try. If you want to try something different, you could always go and do that as well.
Yeah, I think Shell Morrison's probably an example. It was a blank spot on the map I drew. And so we needed to stick something in there, or I felt the need to stick something in there. So I threw it in. And then, yeah, I do recall that it was probably a game that Cam was playing or running that had us visit there briefly. And so we got to meet these three rolled up characters. Cam was one of them, and two of his friends were the other two. And yeah, I vaguely recall it was a tense meeting, but that was about it. But then having left there, it to me anyways, it felt like, well, that's all Cam's creation, and if he wants to do something with it, that's great. But I don't think we ever went back there. So there are places on the world map, quite detailed places that never showed up even in the games, I don't think. I just sort of prepared in advance a bunch of maps, and or if I did and it showed up in a game, it was very briefly, and so you saw the map for half a session, and that was it. And then all those maps just piled up, and so there's huge areas of the world that basically are a clean slate. So I don't know, Cam, you're saying you look back and think about stuff that you could have changed. I can't think of anything along those lines. Nothing really comes to mind that's a huge structural technical flaw that we've been patching over ever since. I can't really think of anything like that.
I'm thinking of things like, well, south of Stratum, there was a large region that is called informally the Sea of Glass, and it's a great wound, very large. It takes up a lot of that geography, but and then I look back and I think, well, maybe if I had varied that region a bit more, if there had been some other areas different from it as well, like included in that region, and rather than just left it at that, that sort of thing is what I'm talking about, rather than structural changes.
Yeah, but you can always say, I know a Malazan explorer went down there and they thought there was nothing there, and lo and behold, they have found a new continent.
It's entirely possible, yes.
Well, given the number of ships in your books.
And more to come, too, I have to say.
By the way, now that people are here, I wanted to thank Livia, the Malazan potato noob, for doing the thumbnail of the Bauclane and Corbel brooch cover, but inserting our heads into it.
Well, your head specifically, right? Just your head. I like that.
Mine. But we did it. I'd had a look at a bunch of the different covers to see which cover we could use, and I went, well, we can't use any of Cam's because it's all just bloody ships.
Yeah.
We could be on the ship.
And in fact, in most of them, it's people looking away from the actual cover. They're looking into the book, and you go, well, that's not useful for just randomly sticking someone's head on.
That's true.
No, I think it would have been amusing to have our heads completely turned around from the bodies.
No, I think Philip's head was there as well on the artwork. Got
Yeah,
four
as someone pointed out, Philip and I are quite literally talking heads. So it was quite amusing. But actually, I have a serious sort of author question to ask you, if you're up for it, which would be where does because I've been watching Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and one of the things that although I'm really, really enjoying the season, I really enjoyed the first season. There were a number of the episodes that I recognize that story. And it's where do you draw the line between like sort of inspiration and just outright copying someone else's story? Because authors live in a world surrounded by all these things that inspire you and all these things that you go, oh, that's really well done. And they influence you. But where do you draw the line between that and something original?
I think it was was it Oscar Wilde who said that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. I think, and I would say that that's a real perennial thing that in fantasy. I remember an author did a work that was very much a rewriting of a classic novel, and this has happened a number of times. And this is the word. One of the words for this is one that you take great exception to, AP, and that's homage. I know that you don't you find that as a fig leaf, perhaps, but inspiration and imitation are always there. I would say it's and these are things that are there for me a product of affection. Affection.
Yeah, Cam, we didn't get any
of that. No.
But was it Bloom talked about the anxiety of influence, that you're always going to be inspired by, consciously or unconsciously, by the stuff that you read. But it's when you sort of go, oh right, I guess the writers watched Alien. When you watch an episode, you go, there's a certain point where it's not homage anymore.
Oh, I agree.
Right.
I agree. I mean, to me, if you are recreating a scene in a book that's not yours, what the hell are you doing? Where's your imagination? Come up with something new. And the things that inspire does not automatically give license to then steal from. In other words, if you're going to steal from something, steal from the general emotional response that you had from that scene, or steal from the structural aspects, which of course are I mean, there's a very, very finite limit to what you can do structurally in narrative. Maybe you would argue otherwise.
You always steal from the best, though.
Yeah, and you steal from the best, but structural stuff is just, I've talked about using the structure of Dune for Gardens of the Moon. I think if I had not actually said that I really like the structure of Dune and used it, I don't think anybody really would have noticed. It's certainly never come up in any analysis of Gardens of the Moon, in any sense, sort of prefiguring my actually being quoted as saying Dune was an inspiration. So the things that inspired me from Dune were not specific, character roles or even themes. It was the structure. It was a narrative structure. When I see, and I've watched the whole season of Strange New Worlds too, and I don't know if I was the writer, especially the Ursula Le Guin ripoff, or did I say ripoff? Sorry,
Homage. The
yeah,
Ursula Le
whatever.
Guin homage.
Or Aliens. I'd be embarrassed personally, because that's just. I mean, there's nothing subtle in that at all, which then makes me sort of wonder if the author is like, I don't know, 18 years old or something, and just suddenly discovered Dune and came running into the room and said, oh my God, I saw this film from 1979. Nobody's seen it. Nobody knows anything about it. We can use it. It's like, holy crap. So I don't know.
So then isn't this really the test of the artist? Because
of course,
anyone can take any material, and what you make of it is your own, ability that is behind it. So I think that you can't really rule anything out. It's more of what has that artist done with that material.
Does that mean, Cam, that you can rule in, taking entire paragraphs from somebody else's writing and stick it in your story?
Right. So the question is how far? Huh? Well, let's look at Gardens of the Moon, right? When I was gaming that with Steve, I based that on Three Musketeers. Okay, so we had this new youth that eventually became this youth, Crocus, who wasn't there originally, but we had this cast of three who were sort of analogous to the Three Musketeers. We had Call, right, who's the old aristocrat, and you're laughing your head off, AP, but was that stealing?
But there's a significant difference between the Three Musketeers, which is outside of copyright, B, incredibly well known, and C, you took the idea of those characters and then based characters on them but changed them. And the story that is told, there are elements of the story with Lady Simtel, which obviously has links to and inspirations from the Three Musketeers, but it's not an out-and-out copy of Milady de Winter and the storyline with Athos. And it gets added into a much grander narrative where there are lots of other elements. But what we saw on Strange New Worlds and even the Orville, they both did an episode where I went, congratulations, you've watched Alien. Like, and it's, if it had been an element.
Okay, AP, your question was inspiration and what your reading background and all the art you've exposed to has influenced your work. You didn't ask about just stealing and copying stuff. Okay? That's different. That's a different question.
Because weirdly enough, I mean, obviously, a large chunk of Gardens of the Moon, while it is, apparently an Erikson novel, Erikson ripped off your gaming session. That's your story that he stole.
No,
so
we ripped it off. We wrote a screenplay together.
Yeah, we ripped. So I ripped off the screenplay we wrote. So I ripped myself off.
For
this
a portion.
Is really complicated.
Okay. Did you credit yourself? Did you put a note saying, I must credit myself for having invented this?
Well, as you know, AP, the entire series is that kind of note, isn't it?
It's just
I took real inspiration from the treatment of that screenplay, and I think that just to see that succeeding at the degree to which succeeded was just fantastic and motivated me and made me feel vindicated in a lot of ways for the work to go on and to do and to be all that it has become.
Because there's another tiny section in Gardens of the Moon. Now, Steve, I know you've read Glen Cook, and I'm assuming Cam has read some of Glen Cook at least. But
Cam introduced me to Glen Cook.
I know.
Okay.
But you could have gone, Steve, you should read these books. I bought them. They've been sitting on my coffee table. I'm going to pretend that I've read them. That sounds like Cam to me. But
they were in suspiciously good shape.
Not a crease on the spine.
Not one crease.
Was it the Silver Spike? And there's the whole sequence of sending the spirit into the trap to try and uncover and excavate. Very archaeological part of the story.
Oh, it's Beaumans, the character Beaumans, isn't it?
Yeah. And then when you look at Gardens of the Moon and the section with Mamet, and you go, oh, he was sending his spirit in to investigate the tomb, and then his spirit got caught. It is so, like, when I was reading it, I went, oh, you didn't even try to disguise that then.
Well, the thing is, a writer reads a lot, and you know, when you're in the process of creating something, and you're pulling stuff out of the old trunk, that can happen. I think the key to me is when an author does it and then refuses to acknowledge the inspiration and pretends that they know nothing about the previous, the originating work, if you will. I think Cam and I never hesitated for a moment to tip our hat to Glen Cook, to the extent that we actually got him away from his book selling table at one convention and bought him dinner, which was a massive achievement because Glen's a pretty shy guy. So yeah, we've never hesitated. And it always struck me as strange when I'm reading an interview with a particular author, and I know I can see in their work there's massive influences from this, that, or the other, and the author pretends that never happened. That's a whole different kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
but yes,
that's the anxiety of influence thing.
I suppose, yeah. But the Beaumans, is it the second or third book? I thought it was the second book. Is it the second book in the first trilogy?
First trilogy, yes, but I can't remember if it was the second or third.
I think it's the second, because that's where that was the other thing, is that structurally, I think it's the second book, makes a major shift away from Croker, isn't it? Is it the second book? Yeah, and I was impressed with that. That seemed really gutsy. So I like that, and probably that influenced how Deadhouse Gates, how I rationalized Deadhouse Gates after Gardens of the Moon. But anyways, the Beaumans scene I thought was, and his march into the barrow was one of the strongest parts of the book, and so it had a huge influence and impact on me. And I don't remember if I must have been aware. I must have been tipping my hat to him with that scene. Yeah.
Well, as archaeologists, I mean, we have walked into tombs and burrows. I mean, this whole scene draws upon almost like a wish fulfillment for people who are interested in finding out what's in that, great round mound in the countryside. This goes way back into prehistory. It's certainly not a new thing.
Yeah. And I can imagine, as archaeologists, the idea of being able to investigate, like astral projecting into a tomb to actually see it without having to do all the laborious thing of digging.
That would be nice. I mean, they're getting there. Some of the ground penetration radar has gotten very, very good. Which, of course, it's not just saving the labor of excavating; it's preventing the destruction that's implicit in excavating. So it's a good thing. So,
yeah.
Cam, is that your dog barking?
Yeah.
God.
So,
he's a big dog. Sorry.
I was about to say, is that the inspiration for all of the hounds?
Steve actually had a very small little dog for one point while we were rooming together. Steve and Claire.
Oh,
we have a
no.
visitor.
Listen here, fireballs. You ever want to see Dr. Fantasy again? You got to pay the ransom.
Dear.
Your subterranean press edition of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, sent to an undisclosed location, which I'm going to disclose to you. Don't do it, AP!
I don't know. Do we want to see any more?
Shut up!
No, I don't know.
This guy talks a lot. Not as much as you. So we got a deal or what? You're
You
pretty
can
bucks.
keep them.
You're
Keep
pretty
them.
bucks.
I don't know. How much is it worth?
Come on. We got a deal or what?
No,
Sub-press
you-
books.
No, you keep Philip Chase. Keep him in a small cage.
Wait a minute. You know, a good nemesis doesn't just fall off a tree, you know.
There's always another nemesis.
Okay, wait, just a second.
Oh, what a cunning disguise.
I can see you.
It's like Superman and Clark Kent.
Ta-da! It's
Without
me.
the phone booth. Yeah.
It's me.
It's the glasses. The glasses make the trick. That's
Yeah.
Hi,
Hello,
Philip.
everybody. Hello, guys. AP, congratulations.
greetings.
Yeah, congratulations, AP, on 5K. Well deserved. You are a gift to YouTube and Steve and Cameron. It is so lovely to see you. Welcome back from the tour in France.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, good
Thank
seeing
you.
What were we talking about? What were we talking about?
I just completely lost it.
We were
with that.
talking about influences.
Ah, yes. Yeah, stealing versus inspiration. Yeah.
Inspiration. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, just had to
I
comment.
mean, if you're doing a pastoralist or pastoral piece and you're late to the pastoral movement, I mean, are you not allowed to contribute then? You're writing, you're drawing, doing artwork in that tradition, in that mode, but there is a tradition behind you of many contributors. So why can't you contribute as well?
Yeah, but it's a difference between doing something in the tradition and going, oh, look, the Mona Lisa, and tracing the outline and then doing a color by numbers on it and then signing
Andy
your name
Warhol
at the
might
bottom going,
disagree with you.
Good point.
Yeah.
but that's why it's an interesting discussion, because you can take something so well established and put your own spin on it, do it in a new way, do something different with it, and suddenly it is so very different to the original. And it's a really fuzzy line between those things.
Yeah, I think that originality is highly overrated in the modern age.
You would as a medievalist.
Of course.
You think literature peaked in like the 14th century?
No. The 8th century, my friend. 8th. But
I've heard that too. Yeah.
I mean, every story was communal property, right? And that's true through Chaucer plagiarized left and right, and Shakespeare stole every plot except 2 for all his plays and all that, yada, yada, yada. So when did we become obsessed with originality? And I think the answer is capitalism. Capitalism and copyright and so forth. So that's when, of course, the almighty dollar, money, whatever, dictated that, people would have to be original, that somehow that they were drawing from some unknown place where it was all just sort of genius spewing out, all this story, which really is, I think the way stories work is we ingest all kinds of stories throughout our lifetimes, and then they come out in ways that we can't, maybe in an unconscious way, but they come out and there they are, and they're a product in many ways of all the stories we've consumed before.
Sure. But that's different from cutting and pasting from somebody else's work.
Yes. Okay. That is a no-no, and I have to say that as an English professor too. Yeah. Naughty. Yeah.
But Cam raised an interesting point, because this seems very specific to the written word, to the media of and maybe it is specifically the written word, as opposed to Andy Warhol, or as opposed to Banksy or whatever. Visual art is constantly, you can't disguise the origins of what you're referencing in visual art, to the extent that burying a plagiarized paragraph in a 200,000 word novel is probably far more likely to not be noticed. But these artists were quite consciously drawing upon the recognition factor of previous works, and then altering that in some fashion or another. I think the motivations are quite different. So maybe the written word is unique in that respect. And maybe we shouldn't be applying that to things like Strange New Worlds and the visual media, because as soon as the little alien pops out of the body in that episode, who doesn't recognize that, right?
Aliens.
Yeah.
I think the point about capitalism is very well taken, but also I think for the written word, what really contributes here maybe is the cult of the author. And this is, I think, reached sort of one of its high points with the Romantics. And there, the conceit was that the writer, typically a male, would go walking off in the woods or commune at a mountaintop, and genius like lightning would strike, and then they would produce this work of wholly original art that was theirs alone, and that was a conceit, I think, that sort of took over the attitude towards authors and the printed word, perhaps, and really was the major contributor.
I agree. And I think it dovetailed, though, too, with the capitalism and the idea of, of owning a story, right? To make a profit off of it, which I think began probably, certainly with the 18th century, I would say. That idea, of course, it was Samuel Johnson, right, who said no one but a blockhead ever wrote for anything but money, right? So.
But you also have, you're taking a well-established story, and it's how it is being told. Because if we think back to the oral storytelling tradition, it was about the performance of the story. That was the thing, because everyone knew what the major sort of plot beats were, what the narrative events were. But how it was being told, the performance aspect, how they drew you in, a lot of that that's where the originality is in a lot of those things.
True. Yeah. Going way back. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jimmy.
Wow. Generous, Jimmy. Wow.
Well, yeah. That isn't that the pleasure principle? Is that the people, your audience shares the knowledge that you are transmitting to them. They know what's coming, but it's the way that you present it, the little subtle differences in your retelling, and they're waiting for those beats to come, and it's how you deliver them in maybe a slight delay or what have you, but everyone knows the story.
Yep.
Yeah, and when you have someone like Chaucer referencing those things and then dropping them in, but I honestly think there's a difference between stealing like the complete story of Alien, sticking it in a modern TV show and going like, No one's going to recognize that
Hmm.
this entire story, we've superficially changed a couple of bits here and there. No one's going to notice. It'd be like if you did the Lord of the Rings and you changed Gandalf into a woman and Frodo into like a guy maybe called Rand, and you sent them on a quest and you just subtly changed some of the things. And people went, oh, this is entirely original. I've never seen this before. But sorry.
Yeah.
No,
you're sorry,
not.
all right. Yeah.
No, you're
Careful.
No, actually, that is unfair because Jordan was relying on those elements for the familiarity thing that readers wanted. More of the same, but different enough that he was doing something new with it.
Well,
Whereas
sure. But consider it this way. Other art forms, think of music. You go to watch your favorite band perform live. You're not waiting there in the crowd for their new songs. You're waiting for the songs you've listened to 100 times, and that's what you want to hear. And so, even Mozart's operas for your average person kind of thing, they would be in the crowds having been there 4 or 5 times and singing the songs because that's what they were coming for. They were coming for that familiarity. I think Cam's point about the romantics, you guys would know more about this than I would because I haven't actually studied this, but it strikes me that it's with people like Lord Byron that the cult of personality began to separate itself from the artwork itself, so that these were two mutually supportive entities, and one was that personality aspect and notoriety, and then of course the other great example would be Hemingway doing the same thing. So that's when things are changing them, because now the works are being specifically tied to an ego that is actually required to appear to be famous in and of itself, and therefore the source of a particular genius. And suddenly you've muddied the waters fairly dramatically, because then if somebody like Byron were to then rip off Keats or Shelley, well, I don't think that would have passed very well.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think even earlier, say during the development of humanism during the Enlightenment, and when you started having even like say Dante was keen to foster his literary reputation, so even you could see traces of it even earlier, and certainly in the Enlightenment, the celebration in humanism of the individual versus the anonymity in prior cultures, and certainly in Europe. So that's a big part of it too, I guess. Yeah.
Mm. And of course we can't separate out the idea of what the printing press did.
Yes.
For this, because when you had your oral traditional storytellers, yes, the performance was probably what made them famous and allowed them to travel all over the place, like the bards and all the rest. But once they died, it was done. Now that reach for fame becomes immortal, and it changes the dynamics completely. Because what do we know about Shakespeare? Hardly anything. But the next collection of great artists, we know a lot about it because everything changed.
And on that somber note.
Yeah, no, I've talked enough for now. I'll be
So okay, well, originality. How much, and as AP has addressed, how much originality do we want, right? And if it's too original, too individual, then it's incomprehensible, right? As the sort of the end point of it.
Yeah, and narrative, because you have both structural elements, you have characters, you have the narrative events, you have setting, you have like all of those different elements. You can use elements of an established aspect in one of those, and if the others are different, then the work on a whole is radically different. But if you basically just rewrote Catcher in the Rye and changed the name, I think people would sort of go, no, you've just copied Catcher in the Rye. Like there is a dividing line somewhere, but it's
somewhere.
not. I don't think it's clear cut.
No, it's not clear cut. I think because I think that the vision of the artist can overcome a whole lot, you know, and the not intent but manner, you know, the way you do it. You might say, oh well, that's The Catcher in the Rye, but look what this artist has done with it. It's now amazing. It's like it's a whole nother story, but you can see one of the subtextual layers is Catcher in the Rye.
Yeah. But so if you took basically the story of like George and the Dragon, or the story of King Arthur's a good one because we constantly get retellings of Arthur, but there are very few of them that you go, this is just the same as someone else's retelling. Usually the author, the person involved in it, has spun the Arthurian tale in a different way. They've changed the relationship with Merlin, or who Merlin is. They've changed the character of Arthur. They've changed the construct of the Round Table or the Knights. And because of that, it's, yes, there are elements that are recognizably and intended to be recognizably Arthurian, but it is very much an original story.
Yeah, very much so. The other side of this too is if you do have an artist, a musician, a writer who is very original, relatively speaking, and I don't think anyone can be entirely original, but if you have one who's let's say ahead of their time, you know, I was just talking about someone not very long ago about Beethoven's late quartets. And people in his own lifetime thought he must have gone nuts when he wrote those. And now we look back and recognize that these were genius, right? So it's an interesting thing where you do get individuals who do seem to shift what people think of as art, what people think of as legitimate art, as art that speaks to people. Because you'll get your Beethoven, you'll get your, I don't know, Picasso, you'll get those people who do take clearly earlier material and shape it in their own way and seem to be better than most of us at putting out something that is much more original. And those people sometimes, you know, you look back and you think, okay, these people moved the needle. They changed what we think of as legitimate creative work within that realm.
I think that, of course, yeah, vision. I mean, famously, of course, Wordsworth sort of knew that he had to prepare his audience. And so, of course, he wrote sort of a preface. And he said, you know, my Victorian readership really won't understand this, but here's what I'm trying to do in Preludes. Here's what I'm trying to do. And he talks about his goal, you know, the language of man for men, and talk, use plain language and break all of these established conventions that had, in his view, ossified Victorian poetry and art for the written word. But he had to explain that beforehand at the beginning of the piece.
Yep. And it's fair to say that Wordsworth and Coleridge were not the first to put forth these ideas. There were other people doing it, but you know, they were rebelling against what had been the more popular ways of writing poetry, more flowery, you know, in the previous era. What they did might have seemed highly original at the time too, but was less than we might think.
Oh yeah. There's the pendulum swings.
Yep.
As you'd say.
Nothing new under the sun, eh?
But and also
it's
you'll
difficult.
have like,
sorry, AP.
Well, I was thinking when you have, say, a story or something that lands and becomes wildly popular, and people go, "Oh, that's a brilliant idea! I'm inspired to write my own version of it." And we saw that with Tolkien. We saw, the Lord of the Rings and what he did with the Lord of the Rings inspired a lot of writers, and they wanted to write their version of it. They were doing their own thing, and a lot of the fans loved that because it was variations on a theme. They were exploring different themes. They were exploring that story in a different way, and they were doing it with different characters. And there is something comforting about having those recognizable aspects in a story, that then the strange and the new and the explorations into the wild of strangeness is grounded in something that is familiar. So there's always something for a reader to grasp hold of. And particularly in fantasy, where about the only real limit is the author's imagination and the reader's imagination and ability to follow what the author is communicating. And so I think there's always going to be that negotiation between the innovative and the new in something, and the familiar to ground the narrative and make it communicable.
Yeah, but it's where that audience sense of familiarity is where everything is exploding right now. It's blowing up, right? And I got my own gripe with the last episode of Strange New Worlds. I mean, who made the casting decision on James T. Kirk? I mean, it was appalling. I don't know, is he the producer's best friend or something? But anyways, it was not Kirk, and so in that sense, I'm sympathetic when people sort of point to new casting decisions and go, that's not who's in my head. But in this case with Kirk, at least Chris Pine, he examined the original series and looked at Shatner's portrayal of Kirk and basically copied it, which satisfied everybody, more or less. But this latest casting was just, even Rob Sawyer, I don't know if you saw his comment, but he could not believe how inappropriate that casting was. Anyways, we're doing spoiler talks now. Sorry about that.
No, but do you really want someone just to be like sort of recreating what Shatner did?
Yeah.
Some nostalgia.
Fair enough. That's answered that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. The spirit of the performance has to be caught. Those sort of faux Shakespearean pauses. You have to recreate those.
But it wasn't just that. I mean, that was the other thing with the first Star Trek reboot with Chris Pine and Carl Urban and stuff. I think the first time we saw McCoy in that film was just brilliant because it was so well played, and you just recognized the character instantly. And I thought that was fantastic. That was the actor doing their homework and the casting people making the right decision on who to hire for that. So I have to admit, I mean, as much as I really like Strange New Worlds, I love the episodic aspects of it. I love how they're even folding in original series episodes. And of course, is that unoriginal? Well, maybe, but it's an interesting dynamic anyways. I mean, in a sense, within the Enterprise, or rather within the Federation and the Star Trek universe, they are doing the very same things that you guys are talking about in terms of authors and writers retelling stories, but they're doing within the canon, as it were. And that's kind of gutsy. You could also counter argue that it's also lacking originality, but it's a whole different issue.
But that brings up an interesting thing about the concept of lore and canon, because in a lot of these particularly long running series, the idea of coherency and cohesiveness to the structure of the story world is usually retrospectively applied. Because if you think of the original series, there wasn't a grand vision of these are the rules. It wasn't constructed ahead of time. That they added things and added things and added things, and then went, oh, well, we're just going to add this thing and hope that no one noticed the end of it. But we've sort of changed attitude in that now, where we look at Star Trek and go, but that isn't respecting the canon, or that's breaking the lore of the universe. And it can be, quite upsetting and annoying. But at the same time, like, where do we draw the line on what is flexible within the narrative to tell the better story? And adhering to something that was created on an ad hoc basis 80 years ago
Hmm.
or 60 years ago.
Yeah, and yeah, there's a lot of inconsistencies within the world building of the original series. I mean, they're all over the place. So, yeah, it's not an easy thing to answer. Anyways, that was just my personal gripe on that last episode.
Well, Cam,
Is that the creeping originality, cult of originality, so that's gatekeeping and policing the borders of the canon, right? It's expanded, but it's still there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm also wondering too about the modern pressures in various industries that have been totally upset by the internet, music industry, the publishing industry, and is there a kind of pressure now to conform, to put out something that's familiar, to be the next Harry Potter, to be, that seems to be very counter to the idea of originality, right? So it seems like a lot of storytellers, story makers are going the safe route because things have been kind of chaotic and in turmoil. And so there must be pressure, I think, in that direction because of that as well. I don't know, you guys feel that at all? You seem to do your own thing anyway, so yeah.
We chose our battles, I think, because as Steve was pointing out, our works were created ad hoc. We needed something, and so we put it in, and that just sort of happened step by step. And so, yeah, there are some pieces that might not, fit together so well, but that's a product of ongoing creative process.
Yeah. So it's not a product of some editor saying to you, could you just make your books a little more like this? Nothing like that.
We're lucky we never got that.
No, never.
Could you make your books a little more readable?
First time around, yes, absolutely.
Steve did get some pushback.
Yeah.
A certain very famous book publisher / editor did confront him. I remember he was telling me at a con and said, "Will you stop writing such fat books?"
Yeah, because they don't. You can't get enough of them on the shelves in Walmart. Apparently, that was quote unquote.
There you go.
As if my stuff sells, like hotcakes in Walmart, which is just not the case, obviously.
I'm gonna go to Walmart and buy one of your books now.
Good luck.
Yeah, that's not our readership.
So
yeah.
But I think the concept of lore and canon, particularly with series, is such a strange one because you can. I'm obviously you gamed it first and we're throwing things into the game and then you started writing, but that's not the way that most people do it. And for an author to try and envisage the entire complexity of a created reality and then write the narratives, you'd do what Tolkien did, which is you'd spend 40 years creating this world. And even then, Tolkien is inconsistent with Tolkien. He changed his mind about things. He got to a certain point and went, I'm now going to change this, or I'm going to change that thing. Look at the changes from the Hobbit even to the Lord of the Rings, and how you can see he clearly adapted and developed ideas that are not really consistent with the Hobbit. But the concept now that lore is fixed, that canon is this must be fixed and cannot be altered. Like that's I think a relatively new thing.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, AP. Are you putting lore and canon together, saying they're the same thing?
No. Well,
they're two different things.
Well,
in your point,
the two different things. Canon would be the stories that had and usually detailing the narrative events. That would be what is canonical, and then lore would be the established rules of your story world. And what hasn't actually appeared but is maybe referenced. And
okay, because I asked because what I was thinking was maybe lore is the spirit of the law, while canon is the written word of the law. Maybe it's that sort of relationship.
What do you think, Steve?
I was wondering what you were thinking, you being the lawyer.
Well, there's a question for a lawyer.
Lore would refer to material within the world. Canon would be referring to the extant material that illustrates the lore. Would be how I would go about defining it. So something is canonical because it appeared in a piece of canon. So the lore becomes canonical because it appeared in a piece of canon. I don't know. But no, it's because if you think like Doctor Who, let's take an example that isn't going to spoil things for people. Doctor Who had, we're going to put in regenerations because it's a way of getting in a new actor. And it's, well, we can't have him always regenerating because that reduces tension. They'll just keep coming back. And there was this idea that, okay, then the Doctor fights the Daleks, and this happened at this point in time. It becomes fixed as a canonical event. And the lore aspect was how many times, say, the Doctor can regenerate. But then they change that. And you go, well, yeah, because narratives change over time. They develop over time. And I think the tyranny of being beholden to something, that you need to be, I think, in some ways, again, it's not a sharp dividing line. I think it's a very fuzzy line. But you need to have narrative flexibility to move away from concepts of what has rigidly come before. You cannot be absolutely beholden to something that has come before. But at the same time, you can't just completely ignore what has come before. So if you look at Star Wars, Darth Vader was Lord Darth Vader. Darth is equivalent of calling him Steve. He was Lord Steve Vader. And then subsequent to that, Darth becomes a title that all the Sith had. But you go, that was never in Star Wars A New Hope. That is a lore change. They have changed the whole history of the Sith to go, they're all called Darth. It's like they were all called Steve, which, is a bit
awesome. Yeah. They should have put that in.
Yeah.
Steve Vader.
It really strikes me how much this conversation is really about many of the changes that came as a result of literacy and the written word being fixed. The idea of something being fixed is something that would not have occurred to an oral formulaic culture at all. And this idea sort of took root as in Europe as you had more and more literacy with the spread of Christianity. And so that the idea of having a canon at all is really, and having the idea of all of these things being fixed is very much a product of that literate mindset where the written word on the page, there's a permanence to it. At least we fool ourselves into believing there's a permanence to that. Whereas somebody from an oral formulaic culture is much more comfortable with impermanence and change, right? And this is where fundamentalism comes from, really. Fundamentalism is a product of the word being fixed on the page, that whole mindset, I believe, anyway. So
I don't know how convinced I am of that argument.
There's a good book about it. I don't know if you've read Walter Ong's Orality and Literacy.
No, but I'm thinking in terms of the capacity of the
brain,
pre-literate, I guess, brain to encode mnemonic devices for oral tradition of storytelling, and then also the way in which the Bible, for example, became very, very specific in terms of the terminology, and then to the extent that the churches would have these huge synods and decide on the wording, the official wording,
right,
and the extent to which that stuff actually had huge impacts culturally in places like Scotland and Ireland and all the rest. So I think there is, even in a pre-literate society, the memory of the brain takes the place of what's on the book and on the page.
So the way that works is the bard or the singer or the shope or what have you has not memorized the story, has memorized the skeleton of the story, but every performance is a different version of the story as they flesh it out. And they have the ability to grab from that word horde, which is it's not a case of memorization so much as having formulaic devices that they can insert into the lines. So it's an impromptu performance in that sense. The same way that modern freestyle rap works, essentially.
Yeah, but I mean, is it Michael Wood in Search of the Trojan War? I think it is. Anyways, he did some travels in Afghanistan, and he met up with a group. I don't know if they were probably pastoralists, but they had a very, very old tradition of storytelling that you had individuals who could tell a story from rote over the span of 3-4 days. And what astonished Michael Wood was just the memory that was involved. Seemed almost inhuman from his experience. And of course, what he raised as a question was, to what extent has the written word on the page actually taken our capacity to remember and atrophied it?
It's like looking up something on Google now. We don't remember anything. If you want to know.
Phone numbers. Right?
Yeah, phone numbers. Because I remember as a kid, obviously before mobile phones, I had a list of like all my friends and all of their phone numbers, family members. I had this little tiny list of all of these different numbers. And the thing was, I never looked at it because I'd memorized all the numbers. The only mobile phone number I think I know now is mine.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We cannot actually, with any authority, sort of make commentary on the human condition predating literacy. We just can't. We don't know the extent of our capabilities in terms of memory. Culturally, we just don't know it, and so we're only assuming that those old bards and storytellers were all putting their own stamp on the story. We don't know because nobody was there to record it.
Well, there were. I mean, you have a point, but there also were. What were their names? Albert Lord, and these were guys that ran around in what's now the part of Europe that's Serbia and Croatia, that area, the Balkans. And there were still at the time. It was this early 20th century. They were recording. Oral formulaic storytellers. So we do have some cultures where we've actually recorded stuff, but they've died out or they're dying out at this point. Yeah. Albert Lord and Milman Perry. They're the ones who did very important studies in oral formulaic storytelling. And then Walter Ong came later, and really sort of the orality and literacy is I think the single most accessible book that explains the whole thing. But yeah,
I'm thinking about your point about fixity and the written word. There was a scholar, I think it was Innes, who broke civilizations into two types: one that had used hard communication and another that used soft communication. And the civilizations that employed hard communication were like Egypt, that had used stelae and monuments that they inscribed their histories and commentaries to try and fix them. They were using a hard form of communication. And then there were other civilizations that were using orality and soft, quote unquote, soft. And I think it was Innes. But he talked about the consequences that come from those two different approaches to conveying civilization and conveying knowledge.
But we see this in the recording of history as well. The idea of history is actually like very, very flexible and perspective dependent. And there are all of these things that affect your perception of the history. And then we go, oh no, but it's written down in this book and this is what happened. And you have those two different approaches where the construct of history is not fixed. It becomes very, very difficult then to reconcile those two different approaches. You go, no, but that thing happened. And you go, but what that thing happening meant is going to be radically different according to perspective, which is what we see in narrative when you shift limited point of view.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course the whole thing becomes almost instantly politicized, right? Because as soon as you are creating this sort of this hard record of list of kings, like or a list of pharaohs, you are basically in the realm of propaganda, and in a sense using that the so-called hard veracity of the written word as if it was in place of the reality. And so you're basically creating your own mythology for your country and your nation. And so I'm curious to know whether, just thinking about it, that soft version of civilization where you have an oral tradition not fixed in any way, is it as conservative? Is it as capable of being manipulated? I suspect it is, just in a different way. And that's the storytelling stuff. That's, the myth of the Wild West and the opening up of the West in North America, I think would be a good example of that, where the legends actually played a role in how the culture and civilization defined itself. And then film came along and formalized those roles.
But then if we think of like 1984, if we become heavily reliant on, well, it's written down and therefore it must be true. And then in 1984, but if you can get in to change the source code of what was written down, then that now becomes the truth.
This is the politics. This is the we're talking about power and control of power, and so that's the politics of it, and controlling the narrative, and then having control of the lever of power.
So, but before we carry on with that, first of all, I wanted to thank Hatecast for the donation, and they've asked a question about. Remember that Erikson recently said he couldn't comment on an animation based on Malazan because of stuff. Well, is there still stuff? And that was the question.
Right. Well, no, we can't comment.
Yeah, we can't.
And also, I wanted to.
They were waiting so long for the answer to that question.
And I wanted to thank Livia, the Malazan potato noob, not only for the wonderful donation, but also Livia, again, was the one that did the thumbnail. So I think everyone in chat should now either thank or give her a round of applause.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah. Although I must object because my jaw was taken away, so I can't talk.
Oh dear.
What an oversight.
Yeah. Or an undersight.
Did AP put you up to that, taking my jaw away? Is that what happened there? Yeah.
But no, because we started moving into a discussion there about politics and narrative. And, this is one of those questions, and it is not like new. It comes up all the time about, should there be politics in stories? And I recently discussed this and said, well, you can't really get away from politics being in stories, but a lot of that is dependent on A, how you're defining politics, and B, what you're really getting at with the thrust of that question. Because usually, in my experience, and I could be wrong, when people say I don't like politics in the story, they mean there are politics in the story that I disagree with, and I don't want to be reminded of things that I disagree with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But do you think you can have story without politics?
No. The thing is, my take on that, AP, which I'd love to comment on that video of yours, is that we tend to notice the politics when we disagree with them. Whereas if we agree with the politics that are present, and it varies from work to work, sometimes they're really prominent and sometimes they're more subtle. But if we agree with them, we tend to find them more seamless. That would be my take on that.
Yeah.
Stephen?
No, I mean, politics is implicit in the human condition. So as soon as you've created a worldview for a character, you politicize that character in some fashion. So either you're going to be conscious of what you're doing or not. And I think it's for myself, when I'm reading stuff that is explicitly one-sided, I get a suspicion that the author was not conscious of of the limitations of the worldview of the characters they're creating, and especially if all those characters kind of, it becomes evident that they all share the same worldview. So it's more a case of, if you're going to write a point of view, start with thinking of that person's worldview.
Mm-hmm.
And so politics is going to be built in relationship, which is at the core of politics, which is, the relationship of the individual with other individuals or with groups. As soon as you think of it in those terms, that's where politics is found. So it has to be there. It would be strange not to be there.
If when I read those books that Steve was referencing, I decide that really what happened is the work is serving the politics, not the other way around.
Yeah.
And so there's been a flip in things. And, like when you look at certain pieces that are actually philosophical works that are disguised as works of fiction, the authors are trying to educate you, trying to propagandize their stance, and the work is just serving that purpose.
Yeah.
Because things like 1984 and Fahrenheit 451 and Brave New World and The Dispossessed, we have these great works that are fantastic, engaging explorations of political concepts and critical of political concepts. And you go, like, I don't think anyone would say we need to get rid of politics being explored in fiction. I think that's wrong. And I think those stories, even though they are political, they are explicitly political, and they're aiming to explore the politics and the philosophy of those politics. They're doing so in an engaging and entertaining way, even if you disagree with it. And it's when people say, oh, I don't want politics in my entertainment, you go, well, I can go through whatever you pick out. If it's sufficiently developed and long enough, you go, there are always going to be political elements to it. And so I find this discourse so strange, because talking about what the politics are doing, how they're being used, what politics is in it, and why they either upset us or do not upset us, that is much more interesting and engaging than, oh no, it just shouldn't be there.
Well, it's a slippery slope. That basically you set up this objection to politics as a prelude to banning books, right?
Yeah.
That's basically, and I know the article you're referring to, AP, in your post on this, and that was astonishing that an author would encourage literally the banning of books. Very, very strange thing.
Wow. Well, speaking of politics, how did I become nefarious and evil?
I think
because of your plans. By the way, Bryson, thank you very much.
None of us, by the way, I hope they all realize that we cannot control the names here. It's this Machiavellian fellow here, Professor Fireballs, who is changing our names to suit his whims.
I have no idea of what you're speaking.
Well, speaking of controlling the narrative, someone is.
Yeah, funny that.
It's a critic for you. Huh.
But it's when we think of even really, really popular entertainment, you take something like the new Top Gun movie, Top Gun Maverick, and without seeing the trailer, you will know it is going to be pro-American military. The rough outline of the story, because obviously it's going to end in a victory for the heroes. You know that Tom Cruise is going to be at least one of those heroes, probably the hero. And there are all of those different aspects of it that you go, heteronormative, are they they'll probably not have any gay characters, they may or may not have any characters of color. All of those things can be billed or discussed as political aspects. the pro-military industrial complex could be viewed as a very pro-American military political message. Or you can go, oh no, but it's just a thing about fighter jets. And again, it's about how you are looking at it, how you are phrasing it, how you're going to analyze it, rather than saying that there are no politics in it. It's heteronormative. And if you say that the inclusion of queer or gay people or LGBTQ of any kind is political, then the exclusion of those characters must also be political, just in the other direction.
Yep.
Oh yeah, anyone who would say that just needs to read Foucault, and then maybe they'll learn a few things.
Foucault is a dirty word around here.
Is that the Irish accent thing? Yeah. Okay.
It must be. It must be. I object to the gross, overt politics of Tolkien in Lord of the Rings. Actually, it's an endorsement of monarchy, and I object to that.
As a Republican, you would.
But
and I don't mean.
I am sure there is someone who holds that position
Small
unironically. But getting back to some of the discussion of influences and things, what were some of the books and stories that you haven't already? Because we've talked about Glen Cook, and you've always been very clear about Glen Cook being an influence, and obviously Moorcock was an influence on Esslemont, not so much on Mr. Erikson.
No.
Well, he has his influences.
Who?
Well, the authors that you were reading that I hadn't read.
Oh, I see. I thought you meant Moorcock has his influences. Sorry.
No, not necessarily Moorcock. There's someone else, I'm sure, who sort of stands in there.
Zelazny, Princes, Nine Princes in Amber, definitely. The whole Amber series I was really caught up in at the time. But I mean, we were also caught up in a lot of classic films we were watching, right? Because I was taking the film studies, so those had huge influences. Lion in Winter, I think, was a major one, and yeah, the Michael York Three Musketeers set, which was written by George MacDonald Fraser, and then that got me into reading Flashman. So Flashman had an influence as well.
Well, here's a question. Cam, you said earlier that Three Musketeers was an influence on Gardens in the Moon. Was it Three Musketeers the book, or was it the Three Musketeers the film, or both?
Well, at that point, it might be difficult to distinguish. I mean, because I had read the book many times, and I really admired the movie. I admired its treatment of the duels and the comedy and how they're just flailing around, and it's just so counterintuitive to the expectations that, I mean, a lot of the audience, I thought, maybe we're bringing to that sort of film. They would expect swashbuckling, and he just made fun of the whole thing, and I really admired that. So maybe a combination of the two.
Luciana Tregan, thank you so much for the super sticker. Thank you for that. But because it's weird, the Three Musketeers, that film, almost like its spiritual successor was Indiana Jones, with that mix of action and comedy, but in less absurdist terms.
Less absurdist.
Well, I think of what was the character's name? Was it Planchet? And like he was played as the fool with a lot of slapstick, and that was toned down a tiny bit in Indiana Jones. But I suppose you did have they're digging in the wrong place and all those sorts of lines. And
well, yeah, I mean, I saw Indiana Jones the first, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Yeah, I saw it in a van, a government van at a drive-in with the rest of the crew on a dig. And that was our first watching of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And we were just howling in that van. And we were all, archaeologists. And the in jokes, the archaeological in jokes are just all over the place, and so we had a good time with that. So I don't know. It's
And I remember I took my dad to see that movie, and it has a real place in my heart because he came out and he said he really liked it, and so I was one of my first recommendations that worked with him, and for film, I'm so proud that I had brought his attention to this. And yeah, I mean, at the time, a lot of those jokes were lost on me, and when it first came out, it was, I think, when I went to see it.
Yeah.
Because you talked about what was it, the Raven? Is that considered a Hammer horror movie, or was it a different production company, the Raven? It's the same actors that were in all of the Hammer horror movies, which is why I always get confused.
Yeah. Is it a Corbin? It's a Corbin film, I think.
But that obviously played a part.
I think he did some work for Hammer, and then he did some of his own work as well, independent work at the same time.
Yeah, Cam, you and I watched that here in Victoria, didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I had a VHS of it. And yeah, we were laughing our heads off through it. There's some great scenes, and then of course the Sorcerer's Duel, which became something I think both of us returned to many times in the gaming, but then it shows up with Quick Ben and Bokalane, which is drawn directly from the Raven.
But it's such a ludicrous duel as well, because it's the two of them sitting in their chair taking turns to do the things.
Yeah.
And then when you look at how that was treated then, and you compare it to something like Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, the wizard duel between Saruman and Gandalf, which was really undignified. These two old men with their beard and their robes hurling invisible force at each other and spinning around on the ground, and you go, it's not very civilized now, is it? Where's the wine? They could have sat there.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a sense of humor, which quite in many ways seemed really severely lacking in a lot of epic fantasy, at least that I was reading at the time. It just wasn't there. And yet Cam and I, when we gamed this stuff, we were just, it was comedy central. So
this gets us to Fritz
Leiber
and Fafhrd and the Grey Mouse, and the humor in there. I loved it. It was so arched, and they were always commenting on everything. The two characters, even the sort of supposedly slow, lumbering Fafhrd had all of these little asides, making commentary on things that were very sort of disparaging and taking the piss out of things. Of course, and it was just constant barrage, and so I found those works were so entertaining, even at the same time, of course, conveying a wonderful fantasy world.
Yeah. It's interesting how I think if you're thinking superficially, the idea for epic, serious fantasy is that, if you can't include humor, it's somehow discordant with that tone that you're supposed to have in epic fantasy. But actually, if you think about it for a bit, there's the matter of contrast.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have humor in your epic fantasy, it can actually make the epic parts more epic, I think, which is certainly a feature of both of your books, I would argue. A very important feature, actually.
And it rings true as well, because like when terrible things happen, that like one of the go-tos for certain people, maybe people like me, is to turn it into a joke as a way of dealing with the stress or the trauma or the upset, that it's a self-defense mechanism. And having that in a story actually makes it very, very realistic in a lot of respects. And so when you have these grand epics, think of some of the most popular figures from the big popular fantasy series. It's usually the quippy, cynical sidekick. And it's because they add much needed humor to a story. And I think balancing, having humor in a story doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be a comedic laugh riot all the way through. But I think humor is an essential part of the human experience, and it needs to be just as explored as some of the other aspects.
Yeah, and characters need a sense of humor, right? So they need to be able to laugh. And we just, as the writer, you're just sort of recording that. So quite often you'll, I think we see it a lot more in film and television, but the quippy style of delivering the flat one-liners and all that kind of stuff, it only works to a certain level, because if nobody in the film world, in the world that's being created, reacts to it in a human fashion by laughing, then it's only there for the audience. And that, to me, that's just sort of, it becomes too obvious in that respect. But if the characters can laugh at a good quip made by one of the other actors or one of the other characters, that works for me. But I don't see it often enough, of characters, of a whole, like a band of people, and they all just sort of, somebody says something and the rest just break down laughing. I mean, I would love to see that, but you don't see it very often.
But weirdly enough, when we were talking about Strange New Worlds, that is one of the things that we see in the show, that, Pike cracks a joke and the others laugh. And you go, yeah, there's a natural reaction to someone, instead of them all going, yes, that was funny.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, those kind of things, it's more performative for the imagined audience rather than intrinsic to the world, built into the world. Because
you were asking about, influence. We're talking comedy, influence, and epic, and we've already brought up Canterbury Tales.
Yeah,
we can perhaps revisit the use of humor there, and yet it's an epic format, and the expectations presumably are that you don't have that women raising up their skirts and that sort of really bawdy, salacious humor, and yet the Canterbury Tales is just full of this really raucous stuff.
Oh yeah, part of the genius of Chaucer. Part of Chaucer's genius was the fact that he had the Knight's Tale, which is very noble and very serious, followed by the Miller's Tale, told by this guy who's telling a bunch of really raunchy jokes, and he's drunk, and and everybody's trying to get him to shut up, and Chaucer understood the value of that contrast, I think, very well.
And not to say, like, not every narrative has to have every single element, but it's, I think, as a genre, a lot of fantasy has sort of relegated humor to one of the lower spots on it should appear. When, like, we've seen throughout history, humor being used to be cruel, humor being used to be funny and make you laugh, humor being used to actually soften the blow of something. Like, humor is a tool that has just as many purposes as any other form and tool within narrative, that you can use it for different effects, and sort of going, oh no, it just shouldn't be used because I need my work to be serious.
Yeah, but how much of that is a response to the fact that epic fantasy is not taken seriously as a genre?
Yeah.
Right. Which then sort of the reaction is to then make your work as serious as possible. So the two are conflated. Yeah, they folded into each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that people are taking epic fantasy a lot more seriously now. Like, Tolkien regularly tops favorite novels in polls, and for the last 60 years, people have been producing essays and articles and analyses of Tolkien's work to show the depth of it. And over time, we have seen at the ICFA, we've seen more and more scholars getting engaged in the analysis of fantasy, of being aware of how useful it is to use in the classroom, to use in university courses, where your go-to text used to have been, say, a Victorian faction novel, and now going, well, actually, I can teach this with a novel that the students might actually enjoy reading, therefore will read all of it, and get them engaged in it because the same points are in this. And it's something that is showing them it in a different way. And instead of them reacting negatively, like, why do I need to read this about Victorian England? We can look at it in a different thing. And science fiction and fantasy both give us that space from the real while still being so deeply rooted in investigation of the real that they're incredibly useful in an academic setting.
Well, maybe that's changed, but I do recall at ICFA, me offending everybody when I was on that panel, and I said that, well, actually I asked, is Tolkien actually an obstacle to the study, scholarly examination of epic fantasy? And people put up their hands to acknowledge that it was, which I thought was really surprising at the time. And I think, and the reason being, it's the default go-to, and you know, in that way, it becomes its own barrier to anybody moving past it, because it is the easy choice and it's the obvious choice, and everybody
it's the
chooses
one that,
it.
You know, if I'm doing a video about fantasy in general, it's the one example I can basically use without worrying that I'm going to spoil the story for anyone, and that the vast majority of people listening to what I'm saying are going to already know about. Whereas if I pick a more niche text or one that is not as well known, then you go, okay, I have to give over 5 minutes of what I'm going to be talking about in explaining this. And
yeah, I'm not saying I have a solution to that. I mean, it's but it kind of it freezes the epic fantasy genre, you know, in place.
I'd agree with that. I think you're right in the sense that, and it's obviously not Tolkien's fault, but Tolkien's, the fact that so much of fantasy scholarship has been done on Tolkien's works is a barrier. Hopefully it's going to spread. I think it has. It started to spread a fair amount to other works in the genre, but I think it's much bigger than Tolkien too. The whole reluctance of academia to embrace fantasy, to take it seriously, it goes way back. You know, I think again, we can go back to, you know, the Enlightenment, or a period when maybe people were trying to get a more scientific grip on the world, and they were embarrassed about the past, the stories, the mythology, all the things that they used to explain the world in the past, and they were sort of sweeping them under the rug a bit. And so, you know, I don't think those things were re-embraced until maybe the Romantic era again. So these ebbs and flows once again. But certainly I think that academia has been unfriendly to not just fantasy, but science fiction, genre fiction in general, to the detriment, I think, of millions and millions of students who would have loved to study fantasy and would have gained so much from it. But I do think it's changing.
Yeah, but Salman Rushdie had that whole essay defending magic realism and the fantastic in fiction, but not fantasy. And it's just been announced that he's releasing a fantasy novel. But while you guys discuss that, I'll be back in just a second.
So it's interesting. He's actually confessing that it's a fantasy novel, not magic realism this time. Okay. Wow. Okay. Maybe he's...
It'd be interesting to see the influences. Particularly if he doesn't read fantasy, we may not see much that's original.
Well, in the essay, he did mention a few people like Ursula Le Guin and Tolkien, but I
see there's the barrier, right?
Yeah.
You know, how old are these writers? You know, they've been around forever.
He's also, I think he's also quite familiar with the fairy tale form, because I believe it was Haroun and the Sea of Stories.
Yes. Yeah.
And so he's certainly well versed with the oral tradition of a fairy tale, and so it might come out of there.
Right. Yeah. The unfortunate thing, though, in that essay for me, and he said a lot of brilliant things, by the way, that I agree with most of the essay. But the unfortunate thing there was just that he seemed to feel a need to distance what he does, using fantasy elements with what these people over here in this ghetto do, you know.
Oh yeah, it's the usual exceptionalism. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was too bad, really. And he's a great writer, you know.
Well,
go ahead,
I was going to say, to be honest, I think his new fantasy book is going to have a lot of the traditional aspects, or tied into the tradition of magic realism. That it's not going to be an epic fantasy in the way that, you know, we've maybe been talking about. Like Salman Rushdie is, I don't think he's ever going to write an out-and-out epic fantasy novel. But it's interesting because what I've always seen, even with academics who study fantasy and fans who read fantasy, is generally this very inclusive approach to going, whatever the label is, I want to read it, I want to experience it. And it's usually people who don't read fantasy are the ones who have the very limited perspective or supposition about what it is, because they don't read it, they've never explored it, and they go, oh, it's just that thing over there. And it's an external perspective of a cultural object that they misunderstand because they've never experienced it. And you go, we could extrapolate that out to a couple of different things.
Well, I'm looking forward to the Rushdie piece. I have to say that this will be something to take a look at, see what he does, and how, you know, how fantasy, quote unquote fantasy, it is. So it'll be an interesting piece to look at. That.
Oh, by the way, Mr. Basement, thank you very much for your comment and donation. Sorry, I had a hangnail and I bit it and suddenly was bleeding everywhere and had to go and clean it up. That's why I had to rush off.
It's an emergency here.
Yeah, and disgusting at the same time.
Well,
are we going to answer Mr. Basement's question though about, are you guys going to tour Europe again?
Oh, okay. If we're invited.
Yeah, I think Leah certainly has something in mind for a return visit, but it would be a 2-3 years away at least. So,
and since we're on the subject, we could also address how some 20 years on, or however long, it's the very first time any of our publishers got us together to tour at the same time.
That seems odd.
Yeah.
Well, you know, publishing is a strange industry, and it operates by its own rules. But it did sound like you had a lot of fun, basically doing the tour, but doing it together, because I think it must take some of the pressure off to have the backup there that you can bounce between each other and go, well, I don't remember that. Do you remember that? And
yeah, we did that a lot actually in the Q&As. Yeah, point to the other guy. I don't know. I can't remember.
I wonder though, are these kinds of book tours? Obviously, COVID was put a huge stop to all kinds of things, and I would assume book tours were one of them.
Oh.
Or no? Yeah.
Well, this tour, not at all. I mean, we arrived in France, and as far as they were concerned, it seemed there was no COVID. So, you know, my wife and I basically had big COVID targets on our back because, you know, we hadn't had it yet. So we got
oh gosh, yeah. But I mean, aside from COVID too, with the development of this, you know, social media, here we are talking. Here you guys are, and thousands of people are probably going to watch this video eventually. In addition to the lovely people who are in the chat right now, and you have other ways of meeting your readers nowadays. Although I know, Cameron, over there in Alaska, it's probably a little harder for you. But
a little harder.
Just a wee bit, yeah. But for the most part, do you feel like there going to be fewer book tours and book signings and bookstores and that sort of thing, and they're going to be replaced by stuff on the internet?
Yeah, they're almost extinct, I think.
Okay, yeah.
Certainly in the West, anyways. Yeah, I think they're. I mean, they were always long-term investments for the publishers because they certainly wouldn't make their money back on the tour itself.
Right.
That just rarely, if ever, happens. So, and again, it's human nature. If you can do something from your from your office without having to buy train tickets, plane tickets, book hotel rooms, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
they're going to go in that direction.
So your publisher would rather you send out a bunch of tweets than go on a book tour.
Yeah, and I think that has really been the case, even in my experience from starting out. Is the expectations on the authors are much higher now in terms of promotion and publicity than they were when I started.
So you got to be your own marketer too now. Yeah.
But like one of the wonderful things is, like, even with YouTube and live streams like this, that to be able to have chats and interact with fans and have these discussions, it's a wonderful aspect of this technology that didn't exist in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Has made it easier to communicate with your audience and to engage with them. But although I suppose a downside to it is it's not like they can have a private chat and then hand you the book to get it personally signed while they're talking to you, which was always that wonderful aspect of meeting authors on book tours and going to signing events, that you actually got to meet the person, talk to them, get a personalized copy, or as I generally get you guys to sign them, to eBay.
Well, speaking of which, Cam, did the book arrive?
No book has arrived.
You're kidding.
No.
All right. I'll have to make use of the tracking number
Are
then.
you pretending to send me books again?
I have sent you a book, and I'm rather annoyed to hear it hasn't arrived yet.
It's just out there in Alaska. It takes longer, right?
Yeah. Well, let's hope it didn't fall into one of the wildfires.
Yeah, I mean, we're not that far away. It should have arrived by now. That's very strange.
Yeah. Well, maybe when you sent the book, it went via the same route that Cam's laptop did.
It's possible. Yeah.
Yes, Cameron, I am aware of that.
For 1 second, I'm going to get the power cord for my phone.
I told you. Told you, Cam.
We told him to do this at the start.
I told him he was probably sitting there with 20% on his phone. Yeah.
Oh dear.
Classic.
Derek, thank you very much for the donation. Ranking my favorite fantasy novels: Black Company, Wheel of Time, Game of Thrones. Can't think of any other good fantasy novels. Exactly. Those Malazan ones never figure into anything. Don't know why anyone would want them. Hang on, I've lost the thing. There it is.
You've lost what?
There's a control thing. I'm learning how. This is the first time I've ever done a live stream, and everyone sort of goes, "Yes, AP, sort out this problem," and you're like, "How am I meant to sort it out? I've never done it before."
Cam has just gotten very, very scary.
Yeah.
Do I need to blur that out?
What happened to me? I've disappeared.
You have. I liked it better when you were sideways, anyways.
Yeah.
Ah, okay. The power cord is in the way of the base, so I couldn't use the base to set my phone on.
So you have to hold your phone for the rest of the live stream.
Yeah. Now I think I'm off live stream right now.
You are.
Yeah. We can hear you. We just can't see you.
Yeah.
Okay.
But is that not his face?
I don't know what you're looking at.
Neither do we. Oh, there you are. There you are.
There he is.
Put it back. Put it back. If the blurred image was better.
Oh, that was my handsome side.
The one nobody ever sees. Yeah.
Well, here's a question, sort of related back to lore and canon and the prehistory of a world. Ambiguity in text, where there are certain elements that are never fully pinned down, never fully made concrete. And I know quite often when you do Q&As and that sort of thing, people go, can you specifically pin down this one detail? It's how much do you think there is a value in keeping things ambiguous so that there can be speculation, that there can be, it's never definitively answered? And do you think having those questions answered in a concrete fashion is worthwhile? or do you think there's more value in keeping certain things ambiguous?
I remember, I'll just jump in on this. I think you might have been there, Cam. We were at a convention where, for the first time, James Blaylock and Tim Powers and I can't remember who the third one is, but they were a trio of steampunk originators. They were going to be guests on, or they're going to be the panel. And I remember being really excited about that because you could see there's a lot of they are writing to each other in very, very private ways in their books, and they're commenting on things. And they actually created a fictitious poet, a romantic poet, and all that kind of stuff. So they were really messing around. And they all got up there and for 2 hours on this panel proceeded to basically tell you nothing. And I really, really loved it. I appreciated it. They gave nothing away. And so that was kind of my inspiration to basically give as little away as possible in interviews and all the rest.
Yeah, I agree. I was even addressed with a direct question about Wu, and trying to the host was trying to nail him down, and I just said nope, you can read into that whatever you like, and I refuse to go anywhere with interpretations on that character, so, and didn't want to clarify there.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think, Philip?
It's interesting because I do think sometimes that when an author shows their cards a little too much or says, yeah, this is what I meant here, it can stifle the readership's ability to play around and think about different interpretations. And when you think about classical works of literature that have been read by thousands and thousands and millions of people, and the layers of meaning that have been added to these texts, Shakespeare probably didn't intend even a fraction of what people have said about his plays, but that doesn't make what they've said about his plays invalid, does it? So that people have added layers and layers of interpretation and meaning and that sort of thing. And I think it's smart on an author's part to be coy, actually, to not say most of the time. I think there are exceptions, but most of the time, I think it's good for an author and that to keep that mystery alive and to keep people guessing. But we've talked about this before, the whole author is dead thing, and I would not go to the other extreme either to say an author should just shut up and never say a word about what they meant in their work. So, and I know that you two authors probably have some thoughts about that too.
Well, just a shout out to Paul. Thanks. Yeah, it was Jeter is the third guest. I don't mind sort of getting into the details on technical matters in terms of the craft of writing. That's my first love with this kind of discussions. But the other stuff, I mean, there's only so much you can do, and you lay out your work and you cannot predict how these things are going to be interpreted. But you also can't end up being so gun shy that you're locked up and unable to write. So, it's got to be a balance between those two.
Have you ever had an occasion where you've read or heard an interpretation of something you've written and you thought to yourself, I didn't realize that was there, but that's kind of cool, right? I mean, I'm sure that's happened, right?
Yeah. I mean, the last example, I think it wasn't a case of thinking it was cool, thinking it was a case of what were they reading?
Right, Steve, you promised to be nice about the conversations that Philip and I have about your books. Stop being mean.
No, it wasn't you. No, it was commentary on a different booktube discussion where some of the comments indicated that the interpretations of the Malazan world was pro-imperialism, pro-colonialism, and it was like literally what the fuck, you know? But so these, you know, these belief systems are out there, and there's not much you can do about it. You know, and they gain traction because they get repeated.
Yeah. What about you, Cameron? Have you ever had one of those moments where you read or heard an interpretation of one of your books and you're like, that's kind of cool? Yeah.
Sure, because they're the readers' product, and they're the contributions from the readers, and they will think what they want. And so I think the problem with the authorial commentary is when it becomes herding, when you're trying to control the narrative, this interpretation, that's when it's a problem. But if you can admit that you don't have any control once it's out there, then that's not a problem.
Yeah, but there's a difference between including the author and authorial intent as part of the discussion and the idea of, no, the author is dead, there is no authorial intent, that is all gone, never listen to them ever, which I think is really strange, because if we could contact Shakespeare and ask him about things, you go, of course we'd ask him, what did you mean by this? Why were you doing that?
Oh, no. Oh.
Uh-oh.
I thought you fell over there for a second.
And yeah, he's gone.
Yeah.
he may be back. But, you know, the opportunity to discuss things, I think the reader is always part of the equation. The reader is always included. The reader is the one interpreting and giving meaning to things.
Yeah.
But it has to be coming from somewhere, and that it is coming from the author, and the author can then have communicated effectively or miscommunicated. And that miscommunication can be on the author's side, or it can be a miscommunication in how the reader has received it. And if you say that the author is not part of the equation anymore, then you overly privilege the single reader response, and you ignore the fact that a reader can be wrong. And I think readers can be wrong in how they interpret things. But you know, it adds to the discussion. But there are certainly misreadings of texts. Like, we've all experienced that, where someone has said this and you go, but that is literally not in the text. The antithesis is there, and here is the textual evidence to show it. So, yeah. Well, actually, we've just passed the 2 hour mark, and well, it looks like Cam may be coming back. Hang on a second.
I'm back.
We gotta wait for him. Yeah.
Hello.
Well, what I was about to say is we've just passed the 2 hour mark, and that's all I'd planned on this evening, because, you know, it's late here for me. So I wanted to thank the 3 of you. Thank you so much for agreeing to appear. And also, I wanted to thank everyone watching, everyone who's been adding to the comments. And I'm sorry I'm not better about getting to them. But thank you so much for supporting the channel. Thank you, everyone, for joining in and watching and adding to the chat. And thank you once again to Philip, Cam, and Steve. Thank you.
Oh, it's good fun.
Thank you, AP.
Thanks,
nice to see you, Philip.
Yeah,
okay.
Nice too. Yeah. Congratulations.
Good night, all. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the next one.
Hooray for AP.
Well done, AP.